Yet it's the basis of all our thought. I can't legitimately use the fact that the assumptions of regularity in nature has served me well in the past as a justification of inductive reasoning about the future. That would be a viciously circular argument, using induction to justify induction. The fact is that it's just a habit that human beings have, albeit one that, on the whole, serves us well. It is custom and habit, Hume tells us, that guide us through life, not our powers of reason. Our knowledge of cause and effect, when closely examined, amounts to an assumption that if two things are constantly found together, with one occurring prior to the other, then we will call the first one a cause, of the second one the effect. Beyond what Hume calls constant conjunction and priority in time of cause to effect, there is no necessary connection between a cause and its effect. It's not that Hume wants us to abandon our trust in relations between causes and effects. That would be impossible for us anyway. Rather, he is demonstrating how little our behaviour is dependent on reason and how much on our inherited nature and habits. Free will. Traditionally, human free will has been thought to be incompatible with all our actions being caused. If every human action is simply the effect of some prior cause, then our sense of having control over our actions is misleading. Free will, on this view, is just an illusion. And without free will, there can be no room for moral responsibility and moral culpability. If all our actions are caused and are thus outside our control, it cannot be appropriate to praise or blame us for them. Hume opposed this way of thinking, arguing both that all our actions are in some sense caused and that we have free will. This view is usually known as compatibilism. Hume's argument for this is somewhat sketchy. He stresses that human beings are just as much subject to natural laws as physical matter is. For instance, similar motives tend to produce similar actions. There is the same sort of constant conjunction of cause and effect found in the human world as in the material one. As he puts it, someone who leaves a purse full of gold on the pavement at Charing Cross would no more expect to find it there when he returns than he would expect it to sprout wings and fly. There is a predictable regularity in human behaviour, and this is evident throughout history and in every nation. This regularity in human nature in no way undermines the possibility of each of us choosing what we will do. There is then, for Hume, no contradiction involved between our actions being predictable and their being freely chosen. Hume considers the suggestion that his account of human behaviour has the consequence that either none of our actions are wrong, since they can be traced back to God as their cause, or else our evil actions ultimately spring from God. With a certain amount of irony, Hume rejects both options as obviously absurd and suggests that the answer to this problem is beyond the scope of his philosophy. However, most of his readers would have appreciated that he was presenting a thinly concealed attack on the notion of God. If there is no God, or if God is not as the theologians describe him, then there may be no problem about attributing responsibility for evil human actions. Hume's scepticism about various arguments for the existence of God continues in two important chapters, one on the so-called argument from design and the other on miracles. These chapters weren't included in the treatise, and they were considered extremely controversial when published in the Inquiry. In fact, the discussion of miracles was the subject of many pamphlets from enraged theologians. The chapter on the argument from design overlaps substantially with the argument in his Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, and that's the subject of the next chapter in my book, so I won't discuss it here. Miracles. The basic principle that Hume asks us to accept is that a wise person will always proportion his or her belief to the evidence available. This uncontroversial principle is the starting point for his dismissal of the suggestion that we should believe sincere accounts by those who claim to have witnessed miracles. Hume is very clear about what a miracle is. It's a transgression of a law of nature, and one which is usually presumed to have been caused by God. Miracles shouldn't be confused with merely extraordinary occurrences. For example, it would be a miracle if I suddenly began to hover 2 feet above the ground with no support, and nothing physically keeping me there. It would be merely extraordinary if I were to win the lottery. Hovering above the ground involves defying the established laws of physics. Winning the lottery, assuming I've bought a ticket, is no miracle. It's just a relatively unlikely occurrence, given the massive odds against it happening. Many people claim to have witnessed miracles. However, Hume argues that we should never believe their testimony, their reports of what happened, unless it would be more miraculous that they were lying or deceived than that the miracle occurred. We should always believe the lesser miracle, and always prefer an explanation that relies on the merely extraordinary to one which is based on the occurrence of something miraculous. This is the sensible policy of someone who proportions belief to the available evidence. Hume suggests that the evidence should always incline us to believe that no miracle has happened. This is because any law of nature has been confirmed by numerous observations of it holding. Given the principle of believing in proportion to available evidence, Hume maintains that particular eyewitness testimony of miracles is insufficient evidence on which to base the view that a law of nature has been transgressed. His position is bolstered by facts of psychology, such as that human beings get a great deal of pleasure from emotions of amazement and wonder, the kinds of emotions that are typically aroused by reports of miracles. This can be a stimulus to self-deception about whether what you're witnessing is a miracle or not. Also, most of those who claim to have witnessed miracles stand to gain a great deal. They're likely to be given special treatment and to be thought of as specially chosen by God. This can act as a strong incentive to deceive either others or themselves. All these factors combine to make it much more likely in any particular case that a miracle didn't take place than that it did. Hume doesn't rule out the logical possibility of miracles occurring, but he does suggest that a wise person should never believe a report of one. Hume's fork. Hume ends his inquiry with a forceful condemnation of any philosophical writing which doesn't meet up to his strict empirical principles. Of any book, he asks two questions. The dichotomy set up by these two questions has come to be known as Hume's fork. The two questions are: does it contain any abstract reasoning of the sort found in mathematics or geometry? If not, does it contain any factual statements of a kind that can be observed or tested? If neither, he declares, commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. Criticisms of an inquiry concerning human understanding. It presupposes the theory of ideas. Hume's philosophy, especially his account of induction, has been remarkably resilient in the face of criticism. However, one part of it which has been rejected by almost all present-day philosophers is the theory of ideas. Hume didn't really argue for this account of the mind, but rather took it for granted and refined it. Yet there are numerous difficulties which arise for this sort of representative theory, some of which I've already mentioned in relation to Locke's essay, such as the homunculus problem. The missing shade of blue presents a genuine counterexample. As we've seen, Hume does consider the example of the missing shade of blue as a possible counterexample to his view that all our ideas come from prior impressions, but he dismisses it as an exceptional case. However, the same sort of example could be constructed for any of the five senses: the missing note in a musical scale, the missing taste between two known tastes, the missing texture, the missing smell that falls between two perfumes. This sort of example, if taken seriously, presents a greater threat to Hume's account of the mind than he seems to realise. There are, though, at least two ways in which Hume might have responded to this sort of criticism. First, he could simply have denied the possibility of having an idea of the missing shade of blue or any of its equivalents. Second, he might have considered the idea of the missing shade a complex idea, perhaps a combination of the ideas of blue and of the relation of being lighter or darker than. But because he was committed to the supposition that ideas of colours are always simple ideas, he chose not to do this.